سوا على الهوا سوا على طول سوا على الهوا يأتيكم عبر أثير إذاعة
صباح الخير أمريكا.
من يوم اللي اتكون يا وطني الموج كنا سوا.
Good morning and thank you for being with us. This is Khalil Hachem, editor of IVF the fastest growing business digital magazine in the Middle Eastern communities in Michigan. We focus on business and what you need to know as a small business to help you navigate the tough times of today. And it's all digital and it's online at michigan.com. Hope you're doing well on this cold day. Today is Tuesday, December 15, 2020. The temperature is hovering around the 20s. It is cold and cloudy. I saw a little bit of the sun out there, but they said it's going to be cloudy later on. Although the temperature is in the 20s, I've been told, or I was looking at the TV this morning, and it says the windshield makes it feel like 6. It's just unbelievable how cold it is. So here, be sure to be protected. Today, we're going to continue our discussion that we started a month ago in regard to the third-party reproduction with Dr. Shamma, Dr. Nicholas Shamma. Mike, is Dr. Shamma on?
Yep, he's on.
Sounds good. Good morning, Dr. Shamma.
Good morning to you, Khalil, and to all your listeners on this beautiful morning.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it. And Dr. Shamma, a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Center, is a pioneer in reproductive medicine and infertility. He has performed more than 8,000 IVF cases worldwide and has more than 150 publications in the world. We are honored and glad that Dr. Shamma is with us here this morning. Before we start with our program, how exciting is it to see the vaccine already reaching healthcare workers and starting this? Hopefully will be the end of the chapter of the coronavirus.
Well, I mean, this is very, very good news, to say the least. And I'm amazing that the government, with all its bureaucracy and so on, was able to pull it through in such a short period of time. This is unprecedented, Khalil, for that to be able to be done. And the vaccine seems to be very effective. I really didn't anticipate such a degree of effectiveness from when we were talking about it back in March and April. But apparently it's very effective. And even people that the 5% where it's maybe not that effective, if they do get COVID, they seem to do not get severe COVID-19. So, that's amazing news to the populace in the U.S. and all over the world.
Absolutely. This is incredible. And we hope that everybody who needs it gets it, and so we can turn that corner. Dr. Shamma, last time we were talking about egg donation. We were talking about different aspects of reproductive, third-party reproduction. Is there anything we need to continue the discussion on from last time so we won't miss it?
Not really. The other issues are a little bit technical and related to different types of eggs, whether we use frozen eggs or whether we use fresh eggs in terms of the donation process, and whether we put one embryo, whether we put 2 embryos back in the recipient of the oocyte donor. That we can discuss today because it has relevance to surrogacy or gestational surrogacy in this context. So I think we've covered the topic pretty substantially.
Sounds good. When we're talking about surrogacy, what is that, and how does it work, and why it is needed?
Okay. Well, let's actually break your question. It's an excellent question, and let's break it into different parts. There is a difference between traditional surrogacy and gestational surrogacy. Traditional surrogacy is a process whereby the person who delivers the child has a genetic direct genetic connection to the child. What I'm saying is that the egg that is actually produced in the process to produce the child is actually provided by the surrogate herself. Currently, in the United States, very, very few centers, if any, would actually pursue traditional surrogacy, because you can imagine when the child is born, and if the mom that bore the child is also related to the child directly, then the issue about that child belongs to whom becomes a major question. And therefore, most subspecialists like myself will never do traditional surrogacy for that purpose. And there have been cases in the United States whereby the child's situation was contested between the parties involved, and that's why most of us shy away from doing, traditional surrogacy. Now, gestational surrogacy is a completely different process.
Could you give us an example? Could you give us an example on traditional surrogacy?
Well, there was a case, very famous case, back in maybe 20 years ago, whereby the mother that produced the child was also the person who provided the egg, and then she didn't want to give the baby to the intended parents, and therefore that was contested, and it became a legal situation that went on for years and years and years. And you can imagine that if you were a baby and a child and whatnot, to have your status as an individual of who do you belong to contested becomes a major stressful event to everybody involved.
Sure.
The intended parents, the surrogate, the program that was involved back many years ago, and that process. So as far
as in this case, you take the egg out of the person, and then you don't have to. You don't have to, Khalil,
because you can just inseminate that person with donor sperm or somebody's sperm, and then the person gets pregnant and delivers the kid. So you don't have to undergo in vitro fertilization for that event to happen.
Okay.
And that is traditional surrogacy, which, as I said, I have never done and I will never do, period, because of the above concerns. Now, gestational surrogacy is a very different process. Gestational surrogacy, as I said, the gestating mom, the gestating person, the one who carries the baby, has no direct connection genetically to the baby herself, which means that intended parents eventually take the child, and these intended parents provide the egg and the sperm. It doesn't have to be from them to happen, but they provide eggs from somewhere, sperm from somewhere, and then the baby is delivered and given to the intended parents as opposed to the gestational surrogate. So there's no genetic connection to the delivered kid or baby, and therefore that is called gestational surrogacy, and that's what's currently what's done in the United States.
Sure.
And how there's a lot of legal issues. I was going to say there's a lot of legal issues, and it varies from state to state and so on. And that's something we'll talk about later on if you want, or anytime you want.
Sure. And again, why is it needed?
So this is actually a very pertinent question, which is not obvious. It is needed for in various obvious situations. Let's assume the intended parents, the mother, basically doesn't have a uterus. Somebody either removed her uterus, somebody basically diagnosed her with conditions, let's say significant fibroids or tumors or whatever, that precludes that uterus from actually gestating a pregnancy. Or, she was born without a uterus. So either somebody removed that uterus or she was born without a uterus, and there are certain conditions in medicine whereby there is no uterus, has never developed and never happened, or the uterus itself is half a uterus, again, congenital malformation that has caused that. So therefore, to that end, Khalil, all those obvious situations where there is no uterus or somebody has removed the uterus, the woman usually has eggs. The intended mother has eggs, but therefore has no place to gestate the baby. So it is an obvious situation. You take the eggs out, you fertilize them with the husband's or partner's sperm, and therefore create an embryo, and eventually put the embryo in somebody who does have a uterus, and that person carries the pregnancy. So that's actually one very, very obvious situation. There is another situation that happens, which is a situation that has to do with medical conditions that preclude somebody from actually becoming pregnant. For instance, let's just assume somebody got pregnant, developed heart disease, significant heart disease post-delivery, what we call postpartum cardiomyopathy, or she was born with a cardiac condition that prevents her from actually going through a pregnancy. That person cannot go through a pregnancy. She will potentially die from the pregnancy, the mother, the intended parent, and therefore we tell her you cannot get pregnant, and therefore you need to have somebody else carry the pregnancy for you. And I have seen all of those situations. There is another obvious situation, which is basically if you take two gay men. Those two gay men, if they want to have kids, they don't have a uterus. They were never born with a uterus. So what they do, they use an egg donor situation that dovetails on what we discussed last month.
Sure.
They use donor eggs. They fertilize them with one or both of their sperms, eventually those eggs, create embryos, and then they need a gestating mom, a gestational carrier, to actually carry the pregnancy for them, and then they take it, because all of that now is legal in most states. And maybe it's actually a good time, Khalil, now to talk about legality, because
yes.
the legality of gestational surrogacy varies from state to state. It's not actually covered under any federal law or federal statute. I mean, and that actually will lead me to tell you something that has to do with why IVF Michigan, which is our major company here in Michigan, and IVF Ohio, these are two sister companies that I'm the president for. Those two companies deal with every form of reproduction that you can imagine, everything that is available currently on this planet. But we in IVF Michigan are actually constrained by the fact that in Michigan, gestational surrogacy is considered not something that is easily done in the state of Michigan. And basically, if you look at Michigan if you look at Michigan as a state, Michigan, basically all surrogacy contracts, agreements, arrangements are considered, and I'm quoting here, void and unenforceable as contrary to public policy. Close the quotation. And that's according to something called the Surrogacy Parenting Act. And those contracts for compensation, for instance, are subject even to criminal penalties. I think it's like $50,000 or something. Now, courts in this situation will only grant pre-birth orders in compassionate surrogacy cases in those situations. And those, for instance, include, intended parents who are married, or a single parent using their own sperm or donor egg, or even a single parent using their own sperm or egg. Now, Michigan, in essence, ranks as one of the least surrogacy-friendly states. And that is why, for that reason, we actually founded what we call the Gift of Life Surrogacy Agency, and I'm also the president CEO of that company, in northern Ohio, actually in Toledo, Ohio, in Sylvania, Ohio. And it's the only surrogacy company in both of those states. As I said, it's the Gift of Life Surrogacy Agency. Sure. And that is why it is located in northern Ohio and not in Michigan, even though I live in Michigan, because the surrogacy is legal in Ohio completely, according to case law, basically. And there was a case many years ago that basically legalized that, and free birth orders are granted, and courts seem very favorable in Ohio to all types of intended parents. And again, it varies by county and by judge. Actually, the case, which is JF versus DB, the case in Ohio that made it legal was actually was tried by the same legal company that actually we use at the Gift of Life Surrogacy Agency to actually make that possible. That's why all of our gestational carriers, part of the Gift of Life, are actually done through our Ohio office and through the Gift of Life rather than through any company here in Michigan, because we cannot do that in Michigan, but we certainly can do it just across the border in Ohio. And that actually just explains 2 out of 50 states. Each other states, I can tell you, I'm just familiar with all those things. I can tell you that there are laws in each and every state that varies. And some states are more like Louisiana and Michigan, for instance, and used to be in New York, were a lot more restrictive than other states that are like Maine and California, for instance, and Ohio.
Sure.
So basically that,
Doctor.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, so that's why, the legal part is important. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Let's take a short break and we come back and talk about the legal part. Please stay tuned.
Okay.
When it comes to reproductive medicine, IVF Michigan Fertility Centers are the recognized leaders. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 5 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. As a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Centers, Dr. Nicholas Shamma is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. Dr. Shamma has performed over 10,000 IVF cases and has helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. American board certified in both obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility, Dr. Nicholas Shamma is a very caring, compassionate, expert physician that understands not only the medical but also the emotional toil of infertility on his patients. When it's time, get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shamma at IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio. Call toll-free 855-952-9600, 855-952-9600.
سوا على الهوا سوا على الهوا يأتيكم عبر أثير إذاعة
صباح الخير أمريكا
من يوم اللي اتكون يا وطني الموج كنا سوا.
Welcome back and thank you for being with us. We're talking to Dr. Nicholas Shamma. We're talking about surrogacy. And Doctor, before we went on break, we were talking about the legal aspect of it. So why is it that Michigan is so difficult about surrogacy?
You know what? In general, or at least used to be, Michigan is a very conservative state, especially the west side of the state, and continues to be so, as opposed to the east side of the state. And I think that Surrogacy Act that was passed years and years ago, we're talking about almost 25 years ago, was never, contested, was never changed, was never adjusted. And that's why gestational surrogacy remains. Now, it doesn't mean that surrogacy cannot be done in Michigan. Actually, surrogacy has been done, and we've been doing it since many, many years. The issue is no money can be transferred. So I tell my patients, because that dovetails into what we're going to discuss maybe next, which is who is the gestational surrogate that is used. Yeah. A lot of times people bring friends, relatives, cousins, people from church or whatever, to carry the pregnancy for them. Those individuals do it for the goodness of their heart. And I want to tell you something. Not because I'm the CEO of the Gift of Life Surrogacy Agency in IVF Michigan, but I truly believe, Khalil, that the act of gestational surrogacy is one of the most altruistic things any human can do to any other human. Being pregnant for 9 months. Gift of life, yeah. But that's why actually the agency is called the Gift of Life Surrogacy Agency.
Yeah.
It is. I actually chose that name. Excellent choice, Doctor. Because of that. I think it is one of the most beautiful things anybody can do to anybody else. Because pregnancy, as I said, is not a walk in the park. I mean, it takes 9 months. Complications can happen. Issues can happen during delivery, pre-delivery, post-delivery. All of those have to be discussed with the gestational carrier, and that's why that is not something to be taken lightly. To say the least. But I mean, we've been doing it. So a lot of times in Michigan, friends, cousins, even mothers have done it for their kids if they're healthy and still young, have carried and gestated pregnancies for them. But of course, there's no money being transferred in those situations. And I tell the patients that if ever I find out that there was material things transferred, then I will actually stop doing the case even in the last second because of the laws that govern how we do this in the state of Michigan. Yeah.
If somebody from Michigan...
No, go ahead. Yes.
If somebody from Michigan, they can go to Ohio where there are less complications.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, here's how it's done. I mean, we do it all the time. All the contracts, are done in the state of Ohio, and all of the process is done in the state of Ohio, and then the gestational carrier cannot be somebody who lives and delivers in the state of Michigan, and therefore to that end, I mean, they can live in any state in the country, and we have gestational surrogates from California to anywhere, but they cannot live and deliver in Michigan, because if they do, then they're subject to Michigan laws at the time of delivery, and therefore the kid. And we've had a situation many, many years ago where it was done and there was no money being transferred, and then the gestational carrier decided not to give the kid to the parents, intended parents, because it was all done in Michigan. And at that time, this couple, the egg and the sperm were not from the intended parents. They were donor egg, donor sperm, and therefore they had no genetic connection to the child. And some judge in the west side of Michigan decided that the gestating mother could keep the kid. Now, thank God, and that happened years ago. But then they had other embryos, and then they used another gestational carrier, and they were able to have a child that they kept. But I can tell you that that's why in Michigan it's very careful. One has to be very careful when contracts are drawn, because as I explained to you, those contracts are null and void and unenforceable when executed in the state of Michigan. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I've been doing this for many years, and I understand the legal, details of this process.
So how does it work, doctor? I mean, somebody comes to you and says, we want to do this. How does it work, the legal part?
Well, the legal part, I don't do it. I send them to lawyers. Now, here's the thing.
Okay.
If they come and see us, if they come and see me, and I have to tell you something, around 80, we've actually looked at that, 82% of the couples will use an agency. Okay. And maybe and around 18% will use a cousin, a relative, a friend, or somebody that will carry for them. And it's much more complicated in terms of using a friend or somebody that you know, only because of the legal part of the story. Now, if they come to an agency, let's say they go to the Gift of Life and we send it to them, then the process becomes very seamless, because the purpose of the agency is to provide basically what we call focused support for both the carrier and the intended parents. And the Gift of Life handles basically all aspects of the surrogacy program, starting from screening to matching to ensuring that all the medical requirements are met. And of course, financial and legal compliance, to answer your question, is who takes care of the legal process. And in that situation, the gestational carrier has legal representations that, let's say, the Gift of Life would have provided, whereas the intended parents will find, and we will find for them, legal representation, because you cannot have the same legal representation representing both parties, because, theoretically speaking, you could have issues contested, and therefore you need two lawyers. Now, clearly, when we do that, we find lawyers that can have worked in the past together and so on. And we always do this. And so far, I mean, for many years, all of that process has gone seamlessly if done through an agency. If done on their own, then they have to find their own legal representation. I mean, we cannot find it for them because, I mean, it's not part of what we do medically. I mean, we'll do the medical part. Now, at some point, Khalil, I think in this process, when we talk about gestational surrogacy, we ought to define, I mean, how do we find surrogates? What is done to them, and what do the intended parents go through, so that at least our listeners this morning understand that, I mean, the whole process might take a year even to execute because of the different details involved in doing so. So, I mean, we can talk about that anytime you want or whenever you want, and literally we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. You know, what I wanted to talk about is immediately after the legality is the, you know, on your end, what, you know, how is that prepared? And later on, we can talk about, you know, who becomes a surrogate. Like, how do you decide, you know, this one and not that one, or do you have that choice?
Okay, well, I mean, the medical part is actually fairly straightforward. So we at IVF Ohio or IVF Michigan, I mean, what we actually do is, by the way, IVF Ohio is a subsidiary of IVF Michigan. The way we do things is really straightforward from the medical perspective. So let me give you an idea of how that is, you know, takes place. All of what we call third-party reproduction, Khalil, is governed by an FDA statute, by a statute passed by U.S. Congress in D.C. So literally, anytime eggs, embryos, sperm is transferred from one person to another or from one party to another party, that is governed by that law. So the first thing that needs to happen is that eggs and sperm need to come together, become fertilized, made into embryos, and eventually those embryos are put back in the gestational carrier. So that's the simple, very one-liner that governs how we do this. But it's a little bit more complicated because the eggs and the sperm do not have to be produced, as I mentioned earlier, especially like in situations where you have two gay men, are not produced sometimes by the intended parents. For instance, I mean, the mother could use her own eggs, the intended mother could use her own eggs or could use donor eggs. Whether she uses her own eggs or donor eggs, the FDA requires the exact same testing for whoever is producing the eggs. So within 30 days from when the eggs are produced, there is a questionnaire that needs to be put together. There are, you know, a physical exam that is done again within the 30-day window, and there are certainly specific blood tests done in specific laboratories in the United States that allow us to actually be able to use those eggs. And if any of those things are abnormal, then a waiver must be signed and discussed with the gestational carrier, with whoever it is going to carry the child, if the eggs are associated with any medical constraint that requires a waiver to be signed. And all of this law, there is something, by the way, called CFR 1271 subpart C in the U.S. statutes that actually governs this. The same thing applies to sperm. So the sperm can either be produced by the intended father or can be produced by donor sperm. And in, again, all of those situations, the sperm is actually obtained, and it has to be within 7 days of when the sperm is produced that the individual is tested. And then those eggs and sperm are brought together, they're fertilized, made into embryos, and eventually one and maybe two embryos are replaced in the gestational carrier, which brings me to our discussion early on that we didn't cover last month, which is, at the end of the day, the success rates in assisted reproduction, especially because most often the patients are young in this situation. that produce the eggs and the sperm. But sometimes, I mean, they're not. One can either put one embryo if the patient is young. We're talking about the intended parent is young, the one that produced the egg is young. And therefore, the success rate is somewhere in the 60 to 65% delivery rate. If you put two embryos, the success rate becomes close to 80%. But guess what, Khalil? There is a major risk of twins. And for us in medicine, especially that somebody else is going to carry the pregnancy for them, twins is a complication. And we were talking about higher risk of high blood pressure, diabetes in pregnancies, but most significant, and operative deliveries, but most significantly, there is a higher risk of preterm delivery. And with preterm delivery comes the risk of, let's say, infant mortality is increased even 4 times, and cerebral palsy, believe it or not, is increased 10 times when you have twins. So, and think about this, the chances of preterm labor, if you have twins, is 18% with twins versus 3% if you had just had a singleton pregnancy. So therefore, whether we put 1 or 2 embryos matters because of all those things in terms of the gestational surrogate herself, or in terms of the intended parents and potential, God forbid, complications that can happen. So therefore, a lot of times when people do gestational surrogacy, we'll check the genetics of the embryos. So when you check the genetics of the embryos, we almost never, ever put more than 1 embryo back. And the reason for that, with genetically tested embryos, the chances that you will deliver a child from 1 embryo transfer is around 76%, at least in my hands as of last year.
Which is a good percentage.
Which, let me tell you something, is as good as it gets. And let me tell you why it's as good as it gets. Because of the following fact. 20% of embryos are considered what we call mosaic, meaning, Khalil, that they are made up of multiple cell lines. And anytime I put an embryo presumably as genetically normal, in 20% of the time, it's actually not normal. And there's no human way for me to check it. Because remember, I take 4 or 5 cells out of 300. If I take and check all the cells, I kill the embryo, which I will never do. Sure. So the point that I'm saying, 20% of the time I'm wrong because only 0.6%, less than 1% of humans running around like me and you and whatever, are actually made up of multiple cell lines. So nature takes care of those 20%. So at best, you get a pregnancy rate of 80%, theoretically speaking. And 76% is, thank God, is as good as it gets. So to that end, that is why most patients undergoing gestational surrogacy will eventually do a genetic testing on the embryos so that they don't have to put 2 embryos and they just put 1 embryo with a majorly high efficacy rate at the end of the day. So this is what the intended parents go through. The gestational carrier has a different process because you have to make the uterus receptive.
Let's hold off, doctor, to take a short break and then continue with the other part. Yeah, please stay tuned.
Okay, sure.
مراكز IVF ميشيغان للخصوبة وأطفال الأنابيب الرواد في مجال الطب التناسلي تعلن عن استقبال مراجعيها في بلومفيلد هيلز ومراكزها المنتشرة في ميشيغان وأوهايو، حيث يتواجد أمهر الأخصائيين لتقديم الاستشارات في جميع مجالات التلقيح الصناعي. يعتبر الدكتور نيكولاس شاما أحد أهم الأخصائيين في الغدد الصماء التناسلية في ولايتي ميشيغان وأوهايو، حيث أجرى أكثر من 10,000 عملية طفل أنبوب وساعد الآلاف من الأزواج على تحقيق حلم الأبوة. يحمل الدكتور شاما شهادة البورد الأمريكي في كل من أمراض النساء والتوليد، أمراض الغدد الصماء التناسلية والعقم، رعاية طبية ممتازة وتفهم عميق للأثر العاطفي والنفسي لحالة العقم. للاستفسار اتصلوا على 248-952-9600 248-952-9600. سوا على الهوا سوا على الهوا يأتيكم عبر أثير إذاعة
صباح الخير أمريكا.
من يوم اللي اتكون يا وطني الموج كنا سوا.
Welcome back, and thank you for being with us. So we're talking to Dr. Nicholas Shamma about third-party reproduction and specifically surrogacy. And before we went on break, Doctor, we were talking about the embryos and the eggs, and now we're going to continue to talk about the surrogate itself. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the surrogates, I will start with the medical, and then I'll tell you what the surrogate has to go through in terms of testing and whatnot, and what eventually the intended parents have to go through to effectuate the process. So let's start with the medical part, which is the easy part. The medical part, we have to make the uterus of the surrogate, consistent with allowing pregnancy to take place. So basically, what I'm trying to say, the implantation window, Khalil, is literally 1 day. We screw it up, pregnancy doesn't happen. So the way it works is we give the gestational carrier medications to put her into temporary menopause for the month, and then give her estrogen pills and patches and whatnot, and then give her progesterone so that we match the age of the embryo to the age of the lining of the uterus, and then we put it back after we ensure in a previous cycle that the inside of the uterus is normal, and we map the inside of the uterus. And we choose gestational, and that leads us to discuss, how do we choose our gestational carrier? Remember, I screen maybe 10 potential gestational carriers to get one. Imagine. And the reason
what are you looking for?
Well, we're looking at a lot of things. Number one, the gestational carrier needs to be, youngish. I can't have somebody who's 55 being a gestational carrier for someone else, correct? So we'd like them to be young. We'd like them to have carried before and not have major pregnancy-related complications. We actually need them not to be on government assistance when they do this. And we cannot have them, for instance, have any mental health disorders. And we also want them to be able to travel and be able to come in for, let's say, monitoring and medical issues. Can you imagine if they cannot? How are we going to do that? And they ought to be in a very stable, supportive system at home. So we actually do a lot of that stuff in for instance, let's say if they're part of the gift of life, we do all of that assessment ahead of even putting that gestational carrier as part of our gestational carriers in terms of somebody wants to use it. So we actually do a lot of work on the front end to make sure that the gestational carrier is adequate. For instance, we actually have the carrier and her partner drug screened. We do what we call the Fda testing. By the way, I have to tell you something funny. When that law was passed in Congress, that CFR 1271 subpart C, they forgot to that the gestational carrier needs to be tested. Completely forgot.
Yeah.
But since the law was passed, they never went back to adjust it. Now we absolutely require it, and we still call it FDA testing, even though it's not technically required by the FDA. So we do all of that stuff. We do a baseline ultrasound to make sure the anatomy. Can you imagine if the gestational carrier needs a carrier herself? That wouldn't be a nice process. So we do.
No, it would not.
Yeah, exactly. So we do that. We do psychological screening, and we also do background checks. We actually have a forensic agency that we contract with that actually does a forensic background check for both gestational carrier and her husband or partner, and to do all of that. And sometimes even we do home visits to make sure that the home environment is consistent. We also offer, like part of the gift of life, we offer the carrier's insurance policy verification, because this is very important. When the patient wants to deliver, remember, 82 to 85% of all insurances do not cover gestational surrogacy. So we actually help them
very risky.
buy. Oh yeah, not only risky, but the insurances don't cover gestational surrogacy. So you do not want to have to deliver and have a C-section or a complication from that, and then the intended parents will end up with hundreds of thousands of dollars of potential potential bills. So to make a long story short, we actually, if they do not have, we actually buy for them an insurance policy that specifically covers gestational surrogacy. Now, we also do something called escrow management. So there's a lot of financial, and we can talk about the financial part of the story in a little bit. To do gestational surrogacy costs somewhere around $30,000 to $60,000 as far as how much the gestational carrier takes home. And the reason there is a difference is because of the fact that if it's somebody who's never carried before, she probably would ask for somewhere around $30,000. But if what we call experienced gestational carriers, they actually command a lot more because they know that they've carried before, things have gone through, the pregnancy is all right, and they get closer even to $50,000 to $60,000. Now, that's apart from how much the agency cost, which is, I can tell you, it's around $28,000. So all of those funds are actually put into escrow management, and they are dispersed to the agency and to the surrogate when certain milestones are achieved. So, for instance, we don't give all the money up front and then somebody takes it and then they run around. All of this money is governed through an escrow agency that disperses the funds to the gestational carrier on an as-needed basis when certain milestones are achieved. That's absolutely...
Which makes sense.
Which makes a lot of sense because you don't want an issue, to come up after, somebody decides to leave or whatever, and then horrible things can potentially happen. Now, the legal part of the story, we also will do at the same time because the way it works is we, as the team, we present the gestational carrier, and the same thing for the intended parents, with certain options, multiple options for the intended parents and for the gestational carrier. So that's basically like step one. Then whatever the gestational carrier decides to use, and that's based on certain criteria. Let me tell you what those criteria. For instance, some gestational carriers will not participate in couples, let's say two gay men. Some of them will not participate in somebody who wants to put two embryos back in instead of one embryo because of the risk of C-section. So the intended parent is chosen by the gestational carrier, and the same thing, the gestational carrier is chosen by the intended parent. So they meet, and then once they meet and they agree that this is going to happen, they sign legal contract between them, and then the medical process starts of generating the embryos first and then making sure that as I said, the gestational carrier is ready. That's the medical part that we do from IVF Ohio and IVF Michigan. And the process continues once the gestational carrier is pregnant, because we actually monitor them for the first 12 weeks and then we send off pregnancy and then send them to their OBGYN. Now, the gift of life continues to chaperone the gestational carrier and the intended parents throughout that process till actually the delivery and even afterwards, which at some point we probably need to discuss the relationship of what happens when what's the relationship between the intended parent and the gestational carrier vis-a-vis the child, for instance. That is something you and me, Khalil, can discuss a little bit and let the listeners know, because there are some nuances to this. Because you can imagine when you carry something for 9 months, it is, you would like to have some sort of
attachment,
meaningful relationship with that child when it comes. But again, that's something we can discuss whenever you want me to discuss it.
Yes. Let's take another break and then talk about that. So because it's still fresh in everybody's mind. Please, let's take a short break.
Sure.
مراكز IVF ميشيغان للخصوبة وأطفال الأنابيب الرواد في مجال الطب التناسلي تعلن عن استقبال مراجعيها في بلومفيلد هيلز ومراكزها المنتشرة في ميشيغان وأوهايو، حيث يتواجد أمهر الأخصائيين لتقديم الاستشارات في جميع مجالات التلقيح الصناعي. يعتبر الدكتور نيكولاس شاما أحد أهم الأخصائيين في الغدد الصماء التناسلية في ولايتي ميشيغان وأوهايو، حيث أجرى أكثر من 10,000 عملية طفل أنبوب وساعد الآلاف من الأزواج على تحقيق حلم الأبوة. يحمل الدكتور شاما شهادة البورد الأمريكي في كل من أمراض النساء والتوليد، أمراض الغدد الصماء التناسلية والعقم، رعاية طبية ممتازة وتفهم عميق للأثر العاطفي والنفسي لحالة العقم. للاستفسار اتصلوا على 248-952-9600 248-952-9600. سوا على الهوا
سوا عطول
سوا على الهوا يأتيكم عبر أثير إذاعة
صباح الخير أمريكا.
من يوم اللي اتكون يا وطني الموج كنا سوا.
Welcome back and thank you for being with us. We're talking to Dr. Nicholas Shamma about reproductive surrogacy, third-party reproduction, surrogacy in particular. And before we went on break, we mentioned the fact the relationship between the intended parent and the child. We don't have a lot of time left, Dr. Shamma, about 12 minutes. Let's talk about this and make sure we mention all the issues that we wanted to chop on.
All right. So here's the situation. When most, I would say, more than 50% of our gestational carriers will maintain some sort of relationship with their child. They check on the baby after the baby is given to the parents. They do that currently through email, through phone calls. But we have not once seen a situation whereby there were any issues as far as that. And the intended parents are very, very appreciative, to those phone calls and discussions and so on. And I can tell you, most gestational carriers are very, very proud of the service that they provide. And emotionally, they are attached, and it's as if, it's your own child to some degree, because they love it when they get birthday announcements, when they see that child became, let's say, 5 and went into kindergarten and so on and so forth. So I have seen gestational carriers, and I've been doing this for 30 years now. I've seen gestational carriers maintain relationships for many, 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 many years. And when the kids grow up, those kids, Khalil, are very, very appreciative, because remember, the reason for their existence depended on those gestational carriers. The reasons for their existence on this planet depended on those gestational carriers. So they maintain a very loving relationship currently most of the kids do it through emails and through phone calls. And every once in a while, I have gestational carriers that after the delivery, and continue to do so, they would go and have coffee or whatever with the intended parents and actually literally see how that child grew up into and so on. So, I've seen all of this, and I would say this happens in at least 50, if not most, 50%, if not most of them, to one degree or another. Remember, the 9-month period when the gestational carrier is pregnant, Khalil, is a time when the intended parents feel that, not everything is under their control, correct? The mother who was eventually going to carry the child home and bring the child home is not the one that is carrying the baby for 9 months. So they are very much involved with the life of the intended parents, and all of those guidelines of how much intrusion they have into the gestational carrier family environment is actually discussed with the intended parents ahead of time. So you can't expect somebody to call somebody every single day for 9 months. I mean, twice a day, for instance. I'm just joking because it doesn't happen that way. But we at the Gift of Life, I mean, it's obvious, but I mean, it's some people. Yeah. I mean, it's not emotionally easy to be an intended parent, sit at your home, sleep all through the night, and wake up the next morning and not knowing what's happening on a continuous basis. I wish you had like a video camera that is ongoing the whole 9 months, but that's not really possible. So we actually help them through the Gift of Life in actually chaperoning them during that journey to make this type of connection between the intended parents and the gestational carrier for the 9 months as seamless as humanly possible. And a lot of them will actually go with them to their OB appointments to see the baby, to do the ultrasounds. Now, nowadays with COVID and whatnot, this has actually been cut back substantially, only because, I mean, you don't want too many people in close contacts within 6 feet of one another. So most of the stuff is done through telemedicine or through, FaceTime or video chats or whatever it is that people currently use to stay in touch. And thank God for all those electronic devices that we have, iPads, iPhones, whatnot, that allows people to be in visual contact of one another through the whole process, which is beautiful. I mean, to say the least. Yeah. So that's the emotional part of the story.
Yes. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you were going to say how much support is what?
Yeah, support that the surrogate person gets afterward.
Oh, I mean, through the Gift of Life, for instance, through our agency.
Yeah.
Continuous support all the time. I mean, they get support in terms of, I mean, think about this from the emotional, psychological part, they get 100% support all the time. But the intended parents also offer different types of support. Let me tell you what I mean. Let's say the gestational carrier has to have time off because of the pregnancy. That is also put into the contract. Let's assume the gestational carrier needs some help with extra meals and nutrition and whatever. That also is put in place so that this happens. Let's assume the gestational carrier needs help at home, for instance. Remember, a lot of them have kids of their own in their own families.
Sure.
The gestational carriers. Sure. And let's say they need help in housework or whatnot. That again is put in those contracts and put in place so that us through the Gift of Life will help them, accomplish those things, on a daily basis if need be. And remember, the gestational carrier, if let's say she has to undergo extra medical procedures or whatever it is because of the pregnancy and whatnot, I mean, this is all again put into the contract that is drawn, the legal contract that is drawn between the parties involved, so that everybody is protected in terms of what happens in those circumstances, the what-if circumstances, if this happens, that happens, or whatever happens. And even when, God forbid, let's say one of the parties gets deceased, what happens to the child when the child is born and so on, that is all put in contract so that there are no ambiguity, Khalil, going into this process as who is going to be who are going to be the parents of this of the child of the child. I mean, you can't have a child with no parents in the United States. A child must have parents.
Yeah. Now, how is there any risk to the surrogate herself as far as a future pregnancy, any complications, or this is just another pregnancy?
Well, remember, those gestational carriers, the way let's say at the Gift of Life, we are actually one of the only 2 agencies in the United States that screens the gestational carriers ahead of time. A lot of agencies, they match, and then they go through the medical screening. The fact that I'm the CEO of both companies, I screen all our gestational carriers ahead of time. So when they come into the process, they already screen medically that they are able to carry a pregnancy for the 9 months period. So what can happen? I mean, a lot of things can happen. Pregnancy, as I told you, is not like a walk in the park. I mean, it's a 9 months, and you can have hypertension, you can have diabetes, you can have preterm labor, you can have bleeding, you can have placental issues, you can have a lot of things can happen in pregnancy, and therefore those things need to be outlined, discussed with the gestating mother, in this case, the gestational carrier, so that she's aware of this. And a lot of those people are chosen because they've been able to carry before one or more times without any major complications, or for that matter, minor complication. So we screen them for that purpose. So eventually, even though there are some risks involved, because nobody knows what and eventually can happen during pregnancy. And remember what I said before, for intended parents that insist on 2 embryos being transferred, they go into this knowing, yes, the pregnancy rate might be higher, but the complication rate is substantially higher. So we try to dissuade them from actually putting 2 embryos back in those instances because of that. So we got all of this left, Doctor.
We got 2 minutes left. Is there anything I haven't asked you that it's important for people to know?
Well, I mean, to tell you something, just to tailor this discussion, I mean, I can speak about it for hours, but thank God that we have this agency. It's the only agency that exists in Ohio and Michigan that can do this, and actually it's one of the largest agencies in the Midwest, to be able to help couples, intended parents that don't have the option of ever carrying their own baby for that thing to happen. And therefore, to that end, I think it's a process, it's a journey. It is a journey that is made easy through agencies like ours and through IVF Michigan and IVF Ohio, because we can deliver something, no pun intended, we can deliver a child at the end of the day that the parents can enjoy, love. And on that note, I wish all my patients and every listener a very, very beautiful Christmas and happy holidays to their loved ones and to all of them. And please be safe, and please take the vaccine when it becomes available to you as far as COVID-19.
Absolutely. I can't wait until I get a chance to take the vaccine. I've done quite a bit of studies on it. One thing I just want to say very quickly about the vaccine is it's unfortunate we have all this politics going on, because this is an incredible achievement, monumental achievement for science, and a lot of people don't understand that. So,
well, let me actually just tell you one last thing, if we have a second. There is no question that if the vaccine becomes available to me, I would take it the second it becomes available. I mean, that's how, because everybody who's listening, think about this: getting COVID is substantially worse, if not deadly, compared to whatever complication, as minor as they are, from the vaccine. So on that note,
Doctor, I just want to wish you,
to all of us.
Same to you, to your family. It's always a pleasure. We're honored that you can join us, and then we will continue our discussions in the coming year. And happy Thanksgiving. I mean, happy Thanksgiving too, but happy Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and your family. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so very much, and to all our listeners.
Absolutely. And thanks for everybody. Thank you, Mike, and Happy New Year, Happy Holidays to everyone. Thank you. Bye now.
All right. Bye.